Good evening, everybody, and thank you for participating in our Go Vote series. My name is Bill Cole, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for Alumni Engagement here at Cal State Fullerton. The Alumni Association is very proud to offer these educational sessions so we can be more informed voters. This session is being recorded and will be made available later on the CSUF Alumni YouTube channel. If you don't follow us on YouTube, please do. There's some great content on there. As a reminder, our other session on the ballot propositions will take place next Wednesday at the same time, 6:30 p.m. So we hope to see you back here then as well. These sessions are open to all, so please invite your family and friends to participate. Do you ever wonder what the insurance commissioner does or why we even have one? Or what the difference is between the state treasurer and the state controller? If you're like me, and you lay awake at night wondering about these things, then this is the right session for you. Tonight, we'll get an overview of the constitutional offices on the ballot. And before we start, let me be clear, this will be a presentation on the offices and the responsibilities of the office holder, and not a discussion of the candidates for those offices. I want to thank the Alumni Engagement team for setting these up, and in particular, Jessica Rowland for coordinating the Go Vote series. We are pleased to have with us tonight Dr. Shelly Arsneault, Professor of Political Science and Public Administration here at Cal State Fullerton. She is a proud Titan, having earned her bachelor's degree in political science from Cal State Fullerton. She went on to earn her master's degree and PhD in political science from Michigan State University. Her research areas include public administration, social policy, nonprofit organizations, and federalism. Here's a fun fact for everyone. Shelly and I graduated from Cal State Fullerton in the same year with the same degree. Fun fact number 2 is that she graduated magna cum laude. I did not. And that's why I'm the alumni director and she is leading this presentation. So Shelly, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't realize that, Bill, and thanks, Jessica, for all of your work on this as well. We probably had classes together and didn't even know it. So there you go. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen now. Yes. Yes. Let's see. There we go. All right. So yeah, this is ballot breakdown. And I just sort of subtitled as who are these people? Because as Bill points out, we don't know. There they are on our ballots every time, and we don't really know who they are or what they do. But we're asked to vote on them, which is great. One thing I did want to point out, I put it's really easy for you to learn more about all of these positions. Just ca.gov actually in your browser will do it. So I just put this here. I like some pictures. So you'll see I have some pictures where I can in this presentation, though not very often. Again, as Jessica said, she'll be fielding questions. So feel free to throw them into the chat. And I guess without further ado, I will begin. I did want to begin. I'll try to keep as little political sciencey stuff as possible, but you kind of have to. So California's executive branch is what we call this. And it's more than just the governor. And that's why it's so complicated. And in thinking about it, I think part of the reason we don't know who all these people are or what they do is because we're used to the federal system. We kind of get that. You elect the president and the vice president together, and then the president makes all of these appointments, and we don't pay a whole lot of attention, but we know who they are in that way. In California, of course, we have what's called we have what's called the plural executive. And that means that we elect all of these other folks that you see on the ballot. So our top executive officers are independently elected by the people of California. And the independent part, of course, means there's no team. Even the lieutenant governor in the state of California can be of a different political party. It hasn't happened much recently, but it has happened in the past. I'm from Michigan, and any other state I've lived in doesn't do it that way. In most other states, the governor and lieutenant governor run as a team. There are good reasons for that, including the fact that, as we'll talk about, when the governor goes away, or if he passes away in office, or if you're in Illinois and he gets taken away to prison. Oh, that's just a mean joke about Illinois governor, sorry. But it has happened. It has happened. The lieutenant governor takes over. So it's very odd to have someone of the other party taking over if the governor you voted for somehow has to leave office. So there's that. So who are we voting for? Again, these are called statewide elected offices is what we call them. And so it is the governor plus 7 other executive officers. Then there is that tricky Board of Equalization, which we will talk about. There are 4 members of the Board of Equalization. You will vote on only 1. You are in a district for that, essentially, an area. And I'll show you where you are, depending, I'm assuming since we're on Zoom, you could be from all over the state. So you may be in a different Board of Equalization zone area than I am, or than Cal State Fullerton is. So I thought also I would take a look, let you all know, again, you have a sense of the governor, right? That's the big office. But what does the governor do? I thought we should take a look at this. The governor's position is Article 5, Section 1 of our Constitution. And you can see the language, the supreme executive power of the state vested in the governor. And he shall see that the law is faithfully executed. I will probably use he, perhaps I should use they, except that we haven't had a she. So keep hope alive. But we've only had he governors so far. So basically this is about what this means is implementing the laws as they are passed. But the governor does a whole lot of other things as well. The California governor is reasonably powerful, certainly compared to the other 2 branches. He is powerful. As a political scientist, I do some comparative state politics research and study. And one of the things we do is we compare the powers of governors, and ours is reasonably powerful compared to others. One of the things that he does that is very important is annually the State of the State address. It's important for a variety of reasons. It's to, get him out there and talk about what's gone on in the state year to year. But it's also where the governor sets his agenda. The governor cannot make policy, so all he can really do is he's got power of persuasion, right? And so he can sort of set the agenda in that way, suggesting to legislators policies that he'd like to see passed, direction he'd like to see the state go in. The governor can call special sessions, special legislative sessions. So he does, again, have that power over the legislative branch. This is not really common in California, in part because we have, again, get a little political sciencey on you. We have what's called a professional legislature, which means our legislative body is in session a lot. These are not amateurs who go off and do something else with their, they don't have another day job, which honestly, in a lot of other states, that is the way the legislature operates. But if something special comes up, and I think that Newsom may have called a special legislative session at some point during the pandemic. And this would be when the legislature is out of session, they're in a recess, but something important happens, and the governor has the power to bring them back to deal with that issue. Also importantly, the governor has the ability to veto, and this is in the veto, California's governor actually has a little bit more power than even the president of the United States, because the president has sort of a general veto. Veto, of course, means that he can just say, nope, we're not going to do that. I'm not signing that piece of legislation. In California, the governor also has what's called the line item veto, which means he can scratch out literally a line. And this is in budgetary matters. And so basically what that typically means is he can say, I will pass this, I will sign this thing, but we're not spending that much money on it. I will, cut that money out or cut it in half or whatever. So there are some other things that the governor does. Again, budgetary powers are huge for the governor, and the state budget originates with him in January. And of course, there's all the wrangling that goes on between January and the signing by July 1st. Some of you may remember that there were a lot of really ugly years for the budget where we didn't get a budget passed in July or August or September. And I think occasionally there were a couple of years where we went into October even. This is very bad for a state, by the way. And so, probably around 10 years ago, we made some legislative changes and some legal changes, so that since then we have governors have signed on time, which keeps things humming in the state, of course. Another really important power, and this one really we've seen, some of these we've seen recently, is the power of appointment. So there are lots of boards, commissions, and other administrative officials. Agriculture, for example, this is, we have a secretary, we've got a Department of Agriculture, but the head of that agency is not elected, that's appointed. Again, more like the federal system. And it's probably not very well known, the governor also appoints for unexpired terms for the courts, for judges on our courts. We know we vote for them, but typically we are voting for someone that's an incumbent because at some point a judge who is sitting leaves, gets an appointment to a federal court, for example, or something, decides to retire, and then it's an open seat. And the governor has the power then to appoint to that seat. So, and then open U.S. Senate seats, which is also a really interesting one, and that causes a cascade effect. And we saw that recently when Kamala Harris was chosen as vice president, that opened that U.S. Senate seat. Alex Padilla was chosen, which then opened his position, which he had been Secretary of State. And so then Shirley Weber was brought into that position. And so you had that sort of cascading effect of, again, a lot of power that for especially a reasonably new governor at that point, Newsom had only been in for 2 years. So again, the appointment power is pretty important for the governor. And then finally, he and eventually she serves as commander-in-chief of the California National Guard. The Guard is called out, of course, in emergencies. So when there are fires and things like that, often those folks get called up. So that is the governor. And I don't know, Jessica, was there any specific question that came up about the powers of the governor, or?
Nope, it looks like we are set on what the governor does.
Okay, great. Then we will move on to a murkier position, and that is the position of lieutenant governor. Oh, and by the way, lieutenant governor does not have, I grabbed, like I said, I like a little graphic. So I grabbed all the seals of everyone that had one, and the lieutenant governor just uses the great state of California seal, as with the governor, which is a little interesting, or the seal of it's actually the seal of the governor, isn't it? It's off my screen a little bit, which is really interesting, again, since they are not separately elected, or since they are separately elected and they're not the same in any event. The lieutenant governor, the joke in, political science is that any lieutenant governor really just waits around, looks, there's an old, and I can't remember what state it was, but a lieutenant governor who said, when asked by a reporter what was his job, he said his main job was to check the obituaries every day to see if the governor had died, because that's what the lieutenant governor does, right? Is a fill-in. The one formal role is president of the state senate, just like the vice president. This is really just for tiebreakers, so it is not a day-to-day job. And with the makeup of California's legislature, we haven't had the need for a tiebreaker in quite some time. Again, the fill-in for the governor, whether that's temporary, if the governor goes out of state, out of country, or again, for whatever reason, leaves the job, the lieutenant governor takes over. The fun fact, as Bill said, for current Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kolinakis, is she became the first woman to sign a piece of legislation in the state of California, again, because we have not had a woman governor before. So Newsom was out of town, and so she was able to sign a piece of legislation in April, and again, the first woman to do so. What the other thing that the lieutenant governor does is serve on a lot of boards and commissions. So the lieutenant governor is a voting member on the CSU Board of Trustees, so close to our hearts. Also on the UC Board of Regents and the Board of Governors of our community colleges. And the lieutenant governor rotates the chair of the State Lands Commission. State Lands Commission is pretty important, dealing with all issues of state-owned lands, including offshore oil drilling, what will happen with all of our state-owned lands and things like that. And again, the chair rotates between our lieutenant governor and our controller, which again is one of those confusing ones. We'll talk about the controller shortly. Another of the boards, again, I just kind of looked, again, it's literally dozens and dozens of boards that the lieutenant governor serves on. And so also lieutenant governor serves as a chair of the California Commission for Economic Development. I thought this is probably one of those that a lot of people in our virtual audience would be interested in knowing about. So again, just a lot goes on in the state. I wish I have an org chart of the state government, and it's quite enormous, so I couldn't put it on. It wouldn't fit on my PowerPoint. So the next office is the Attorney General. I think we probably have a little bit better sense of what an Attorney General is and does. This really is considered the second most important executive officer in the state. This is a person that often positions themselves for governor, not always very successfully, but they do often run for governor. This position, again, because all of these folks are elected independently, again, unlike at the federal level, the Attorney General does not have to do or pursue what the governor wants. And so that has, over time, occasionally created conflicts between Attorney General and the governor's office. Again, you will most often see any of these sorts of conflicts between the governor and then the other executives when there's a difference in parties. And I just thought I anticipating a question. Yes, the Attorney General must be an attorney in the state of California. So the Attorney General does a number of things, overseeing the Department of Justice, of course. And so if the state is sued, the Attorney General and his or her office represents the state interest in court cases, serves as legal counsel to state officers and to state agencies as well. Again, as part of the Department of Justice, oversees state attorneys and law enforcement agencies. And so that can be important. There is currently a situation in Los Angeles County with the Sheriff's Department that the Attorney General has taken over so that there was not a conflict of interest in the Sheriff's Department sort of investigating itself, right? So again, these things matter, and this is how the system works. There's some newer trends I thought I would just mention because you might hear about these. Attorneys General across the country have done the first one, using the Office for Consumer and Environmental Protection, especially environmental protection, that's very specific to California. Other attorneys general as well. Probably a trend of the past 20 years or so, getting much more into the consumer rather than just the sort of criminal law sorts of issues. And then a trend that began during the Obama administration, attorneys general in more conservative states decided that they would sort of take on a new mantle of suing the federal government over a variety of things. Often you saw this in environmental protection questions. So if the federal government passed an environmental protection law, you could count on several states in particular, their attorneys general, to sue the federal government to overturn that piece of regulation. And frankly, when the Trump administration came in, then you saw more liberal states, including our own, basically do the same thing and attempt, if the Trump administration had had passed a piece of legislation or cut a piece of cut an environmental protection, our attorney general would dive in and sue the federal government. So those are sort of newer things that we haven't always seen attorneys general do. But again, a very powerful position. So in the position to do that sort of thing.
We did actually have a few questions that came
Oh,
up.
okay.
Does the governor also have the power to grant pardons for state crimes?
Yeah, the governor can commute people's sentences. We use the term commute, but yeah, they can do that. They don't often, of course. When they do it's often very high profile and sometimes, again, politically can backfire.
Perfect. And then clarification, and again, I will not try to pronounce this because I don't know how, letting a prisoner out of prison on parole.
Well, yeah, I mean, that falls under the commuting of the sentence, right? I mean, I think it falls into the same, is it? Right.
Yeah, I believe that's up to the governor. A perfect example would be the Manson gang is still in jail. Even though parole boards have tended to recommend paroles, the government has often stepped in, as he did just last week with the last one, I think Krenwinkel or whatever, saying, nope, still think you're a threat to society, you stay in jail.
Right. Yeah, so it can work both ways.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification. I will go ahead and I'll let you continue the presentation. We'll get to some of the other questions in a bit.
Okay. All right, so there we go. Secretary of State, for some reason, did not have their own little seal. I'm sad about that. The Secretary of State is the chief clerk, and by clerk, when you're talking about government, clerk is not a low-level position by any stretch. So this is sort of the state's clerk. You may think of, you might be familiar with your city clerk or your county clerk. Again, they in your city or the county are the chief elections officers there. And so our Secretary of State is the chief elections officer for the state itself. This is a huge job in California. I mean, it's a huge job at any point, whether you're a city clerk or a county, but certainly at the state level, for a variety of reasons. One is we have over 20 million registered voters. So you're talking about overseeing all of that. At the state level, we've got voter information in 10 different languages. And so again, the Secretary of State oversees all of that and oversees our direct democracy process. And that, as we all know, and again, you'll hear from Dr. Hill next week about, I think it's only 7 ballot initiatives this time, but most of you probably have familiarity with, I think we typically have 12 is usually the more common sort of ballpark, 15. There are a lot, and so the Secretary of State has to deal with all of that and counting the ballots and the petition signatures and ensuring that the ballots or that the petitions are all correct, and then that this proposition should move on to the ballot process. So again, in the state of California, this is a huge job. For those of you who might not know, about half the states do not have any ability to engage in direct democracy at all. So there are never any propositions on their ballots through the people. Maybe their legislatures may be able to put something on the ballot, but the people cannot. So that makes the job a bit easier. Other things that our Secretary of State does, keeping track of the records and archives. We have a lot of programs that run through the Secretary of State's office. I just grabbed a couple that I thought were, again, possibly of interest to our audience. One is the Safe at Home registry, which I think is really, again, really important. What this does is for victims of domestic violence and other, stalking, things like that. Safe at Home program allows those folks to get an alternative address so that they are not easily tracked by someone who might wish to do them harm. So again, a really important program that's run through Secretary of State. And then something like domestic partner registries is another that the Secretary of State's office runs. And so again, just very important records and keeping track of registries and that sort of thing. The Secretary of State also grants charters to corporations and incorporates nonprofit organizations. So very important there, again, for probably some of the folks in our viewing audience. If you are in your, in private business for yourself, you probably are familiar with, especially if you've started a business, familiar with that process. And also, again, for those in the nonprofit world, incorporating nonprofits. And I know the nonprofit side of it better than the corporate side, but I know the Secretary of State's office has a wealth of information for nonprofits as they are taking off and beginning their journey as organizations. And then just another thing I thought is sort of, again, as Bill says, fun fact, the Secretary of State serves as a trustee of the California Museum, again, sort of that major archive of all things state of California. All right, then we come to these tricky ones, which I think the tricky ones are the controller, the treasurer, the Board of Equalization. What do these people do? Who are they? What's the difference? Why do we have two of them? Plus the board, right? So I thought I'd start with the controller. This is considered the more powerful of between controller and treasurer. This is the state fiscal officer. It is the person that writes the checks, basically. And so that includes state employee, including CSU employee paychecks. So I thought some folks here might be interested in that. And then also for vendors and contractors and things like that, right? Just making sure that the folks get paid. Maintains accounts of state government finances. And again, I thought of what would people be interested in that falls under this. You may be familiar, or maybe you are not, and you are now happy to be familiar with the concept of unclaimed property division. So the unclaimed property division of the state controller's office, if you, let's say you have had a tax rebate or a refund and you never picked it up, you never cashed it for some reason. If you were doing some banking and maybe, a bank went out or they merged and you never picked up your money there, the controller's office maintains this. And so there's a registry also there that you can go and put in your name and your information. And you can just do this every couple months, if you like, to check on and see if you've got any unclaimed property, by which they mean money, being held by the controller for you. So there you go. The controller also is in charge of auditing state financial records. And in part, a big part of that goes along with overseeing local government finance. So again, auditing both the state financial records and assisting with accounting and auditing procedures for our local governments, keep them all on track. And this includes things, so by local government, we include things like the 4,000 special districts that exist in California. We don't have time to talk about special districts or what they are if you are not familiar. The example I have here is the Orange County Transportation Authority. Basically, if it ends in a district or ends in an authority, it is a special district, and it has its own financing and its own boards and its own rules and regulations. And again, the controller's office is the one that oversees finances for those. The other thing the controller does, no joke, serves on over 70 state boards and commissions and things like that, which that's a lot. That's a lot. Again, there are several of these positions that serve on a lot of boards. I think the controller wins for the number of boards that they sit on. One of which, again, sort of not surprisingly, the Franchise Tax Board. So of course, those are the folks that handle income taxes, right? So you're mostly familiar with them. And then the Board of Equalization, who we'll talk about in a bit. So the controller sits on both of those boards. Other boards, again, that you're not surprised to hear: CalPERS, the State Pension Board; CalSTRS, the Teachers State Pension Board. So the controller sits on all of these, and again, really just has a lot of oversight and interactions with all of these financial and fiscal concerns in the state. Then we have the treasurer, which, one thing, I don't know if in many states, a controller is called a comptroller. So if you're more familiar with that, by the way, we just call it controller, not comptroller. Just thought I'd add that. All right, then we have, of course, also the treasurer, and the treasurer is considered less powerful than the controller, as I said, but still doing really important and good stuff. The state's treasurer is essentially the investment banker and finance banker, so responsible for a lot of sort of like some of the bigger ticket items as well. So things like maintaining a good credit rating for the state. And if you're not familiar with that, I mean, it really is what it sounds like. You have your own personal credit rating. The states all have a credit rating as well. And just like when you're borrowing money, if you've got a good credit rating, you get to borrow money more cheaply. Same thing with the state. If the state has a good credit rating, we can borrow money more cheaply. And that's for, capital projects, often things like infrastructure. So again, when our investments are good, which again, the treasurer is in charge of, when the economy is good, our credit rating will be good. It's more advantageous for us to borrow, again, just like in your own personal world. This is really important. The investment side, of course, CalSTRS, CalPERS, as I just mentioned, these are the public retirement pension funds for the state of California, and they are pretty enormous. The state of California is enormous. We've got a lot of people, and we've got a lot of people in these pension systems, obviously. And so this is very important for the state in general, not just pensioners, because again, state money. And related to the credit rating and the bonds and for capital projects and things like that, the treasurer oversees the sale and redemption of state bonds. So again, that's also how we fund large projects. Similarly to the controller, the treasurer sits on dozens and dozens of boards, not 70, but many. Also sits on CalPERS and CalSTRS, again, not surprisingly. And again, I just grabbed most of what the treasurer sits on, lots of school related, California School Finance Authority, the California Transportation Finance Authority, and then the Scholar Share Investment Board, which I thought, again, given our audience of alum, you may have use a Scholar Share, or maybe if you've got kids, you are investing for them. That's those 529s that help you send your kids to Cal State Fullerton. All right. And then we have the State Board of Equalization. And again, this is the one I think that is the most murky. So this is the map of the districts for the Board of Equalization. It's a little odd, I think you can see. But as we know, the bulk of the people in the state of California live down south where we live. So I'm actually in LA County. And so LA County itself is District 3. And then District 4 is all of the other southernmost counties. And then you see District 1 and District 2 are just kind of slicing the state in half in this kind of odd way. There are 4 positions, again, one representing each district. There are actually 5 members of the Board of Equalization, but the state controller is that 5th member always. So what is this thing? Again, it was created when the state began. It was created to regulate county property tax assessment practices. And they had, there were some issues with the Board of Equalization back in 2017. And so they went through a reorganization. They had a lot more responsibilities for sales taxes and things prior to 2017. But again, there were some some shady business, I guess we would say. And so actually a lot of their power and authority and responsibility was taken away. So rather than them handling state sales tax, which again, you can imagine is a big deal in the state of California, we have a separate department for taxes and fees that handles sales tax issues now. And that group there's nobody elected to it, is all appointed heads. And then most everyone else is, just a hired, state government worker who's hired to handle these things. And again, probably background in finance and things like that. So what does the Board of Equalization do now? They oversee and collect really of this small number of taxes, especially the property taxes. And again, that's why they were created in the first place. And then they grew over time, and now they have kind of shrunk. But again, making sure that your assessors in your county are licensed, are doing what they're supposed to do, know what they're supposed to do, are assessing fairly. You can complain to them if they are not. And they're also covering taxes on insurance companies, which again, it seems a little bit out of the norm. That's something we think of very often. And then the third area is alcohol taxes and fees. And this can be more complicated than one might imagine. The rules on taxes for alcohol differ for beer versus wine versus distilled liquor. The rules differ based on the percent of alcohol content in your beverage, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're wondering why, for those who might be a little younger in the audience and you're wondering why, this is all based on the ideas of alcohol as sort of a sin, and alcohol taxes being sin taxes. And, if I guess higher alcohol content is probably more sinful, and so your tax rate has to be higher on that. So that's the State Board of Equalization. The next is our Superintendent of Public Instruction. There's a couple of interesting things about the Superintendent of Public Instruction. The first, the generic, they oversee the Department of Education. One of the things is this is the only nonpartisan executive office that we have in the state. So by which I mean, the person is not designated as a Democrat or Republican or Green or Libertarian or whatever party they may have. And just, of course, anyone running for Superintendent of Public Instruction undoubtedly has a party affiliation. We just have this interesting thing in the state of California where we like to pretend that if we don't attach a party to the person, they are less partisan somehow or nonpartisan. Just again, as a sort of political science aside, this is why you're so confused with your city council members and board members and all of those folks. They all have party affiliations too, friends. They're just not allowed to let you know what they are. So there you go. The other weird thing about the Superintendent of Public Instruction is that this position really shares power over the Department of Education with an appointed secretary of the Board of Education. And so that can also be a little strange and awkward. The State Board of Education itself has more limited responsibilities that are a little bit more specific to teachers. It seems, where the Superintendent of Public Instruction is a little bit sort of more broad, but it's a bit of an odd position, and not entirely sure why we have it designed, this way. Again, this is primarily K through 12, some preschool and some adult education oversees the Department of Education, but the Superintendent of Public Instruction also, not surprisingly, sits on our Board of Trustees and also the UC Board of Regents. And then finally, we have our Insurance Commissioner, which Bill had mentioned at the at the start. Again, one of those that, what is that and who is that and what does that person do? Up until 1988, the insurance commissioner was appointed by the governor, which may be part of why people say, wait, what? Where did this come from? The position became elected in 1988, as you can see, by initiative, which means you, the good folks of California, put it on the ballot and said, yes, we want to elect our insurance commissioner. Presumably, the argument went that the insurance commissioner was not as responsive to the people as he or she could or should be. And if we elected the insurance commissioner, they would be more responsive to the people. I'll have more to say on that in a sec. But what does the insurance commissioner do? Well, not terribly surprisingly, this is a regulatory agency. And so the Department of Insurance regulates the insurance industry. And so what do we mean by that? We mean a lot, right? Home insurance, auto, health, long-term care, workers' compensation, even pet insurance is under the purview of the insurance commissioner. So a lot. Obviously, and not surprisingly, the largest insurance industry in the country, because largest state. Other things along the lines of what the insurance commissioner does, oversees the agencies, the brokers, and the agents in the industry, issues their licenses and things like that. So that's sort of on the industry side. And then from you, the consumer side, processes all the consumer complaints, investigates fraud, and prosecutes instances of fraud when consumers are ripped off by the insurance industry. So recently, with all of the sort of growing number and intensity of wildfires and the growth of our wildfire season, for example, in the state of California, some of you may have had this unfortunate experience where some of the insurance companies are saying, we're no longer going to insure your home against fire because of where you live. And so the insurance commissioner has tried to step in and kind of mitigate some of that, but I don't really think too much avail. Now, my political science, I'm going to put on my political science hat for a commentary here real quickly about the insurance commissioner. I understand the sentiment that if the person is elected by the people, they may be then more inclined to be responsive to the people. On the other hand, I'm going to play devil's advocate here with my political science hat on. This is a regulatory agency. And if we think to ourselves, who really cares about the insurance commissioner? For example, who's going to fund a candidate to be the insurance commissioner? Well, it's probably one of two industry folks. It's going to be the insurance industry itself, or it's probably going to be attorneys that trial attorneys that will take insurance companies to court, right? So lo and behold, whatever now, going on 30 years later, we've been doing this insurance commissioner thing. And that's who funds those elections. So the downside is then, does that mean that this position is more beholden to, to these industries than to the people? But that's sort of the political science skepticism, I guess I would say, about a position like this. And frankly, about any position. I guess my other, when we're talking about campaigns and elections, of course, in the world of political science, I think follow the money is always where you should go check out who's funding folks. And if you think that if you agree with those folks, great. And if not, then you may want to look at the other candidates. So that is all I have. I hope that that helps you understand these positions better and encourages you to get out there and vote. I don't know if we're getting out and voting anymore. Are we? We're all voting from home.
Luckily, we have the option of doing both now, don't we?
We do. So.
We had some questions that came in that I thought I would just save for the end for the presentation. So they are kind of, just within order of the presentation, but out of order in its own sense as well.
Okay.
Since the district attorney is on the county level, do we ever get a chance to vote on those individuals?
The district attorney is, yes, is an elected position. Yes.
Perfect. As a controller, do the controllers have to be a CPA or a certified public accountant?
Neither, as far as I know, neither the controller nor the treasurer do. However, not surprisingly, both usually have a background in finance, right? So, but they don't have to, unlike the attorney general, who does have to be an attorney. Yeah.
The BOE equalization collects property tax, we believe those fund public schools. First, is that correct? And then second, who disperses the property taxes to those schools?
So,
and if this is a broader follow-up question later, if it's too broad, please let me know.
Yeah, I mean, so the Board of the Department of Education, will really distribute those funds. We have a weird thing, I guess, in the state of California. Because of Prop 13, which is I don't know, a lot of folks may not know, you probably have heard of it. So Prop 13 basically meant that so it limited property taxes in the state. And so we have actually a lot less property tax reliance for our school funding than most other states. And what it did, what Prop 13, one of the things that Prop 13 did was, again, sort of take that money, centralize it at the state level as opposed to local level. So there's actually not a lot of ability for your local schools to raise money, tax money in that way. I don't know if that's sort of helping to answer the question. So that money then would just be distributed back from the Department of Education to schools. And there are formulas. There's the local control, what is LCCF, and I can't remember what the middle C is. But so there's a new funding formula that Governor Brown started for the schools. And so that's actually supposed to help lower income schools get more tax dollars than they might have previously. But the whole way schools are funded is really complicated.
Okay, thank you. And then if you're able to let us know, when the positions that you went over this evening, do you know if any of them have term limits or how long they're able to stay in that office?
Yeah, 4 years. They're all limited to 2 4-year terms.
And then also lastly, as we're trying to educate ourselves and finding out the best way to vote, do you have any sites that you suggest that we go to kind of research the candidates that might be up for these positions to better understand who might be backing them or what their stand for and so forth?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. The candidates themselves, obviously you are, take what they have to say with a grain of salt, and you're going to get 1,000,001 flyers in the mail and that sort of thing. But again, I think that the strategy of follow the money is and the endorsements is what I would suggest. So sometimes on those flyers they will flat out tell you who is sponsoring them or endorsing them, who's endorsed them. But definitely on their web pages you should be able to see who's endorsed them. And again, that's that nice way to find out, is this someone who is valued by groups whose values align with mine?
If you're not sure on who to vote for, you really don't, in a sense, not care, but you're just not sure. Is it better to vote for someone that you think would be best or not to vote at all on that position?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I don't know. I think maybe in this case, I might take the Hippocratic oath approach and do no harm by just not voting at all. It happens rarely, but you know, to me, it's happened only once. I will not say what position, but I relied on you know, a recommendation of someone that I thought, oh, well, you work in that industry, so you must know. And then I was very, very unhappy that I didn't do more research. So in that case, again, I think I should have followed my own advice and do no harm.
And then there actually a question that did just come in as well about the Women League of Voters. Do you know if they still clarify the candidates' positions?
You know, I was about to mention Women's League of Voters when for that earlier question, and then I wasn't sure if they still do that or not. So I do not know. And you know, I'm sorry, I should have looked that up. I didn't even think about it. They're who I definitely always suggest you go to. They're definitely a good organization to go to. And I know that they do the propositions. I would think they still do the candidates, but I'm not sure.
Perfect. And then lastly, there's been a lot of requests for your presentation this evening. Will that be available to everyone that joined us?
Oh, Jessica, if you can make it available to them, that's fine with me.
Perfect. We'll do that then. We'll go ahead and make sure it gets shared. If there's any other questions, please send them over right now, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask if you'd like. All right. It looks like the questions are done for this evening, but if you should have any questions that you did think about while you're laying in bed tonight and you have to get out, please feel free to email them to me. You can reach me at alumnievents@fullerton.edu. I'll put that in the chat in just a second, and I'll make sure that the questions get to Dr. Shelly as soon as possible for a response. Thank you so much again for joining us this evening. We do have session 2 of our Go Vote series next Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. We'll be going over the propositions that will be on our ballot. Again, thank you so much to Dr. Shelly for such a wonderful presentation and going over everything with us. I know I'm definitely in a better position to vote. Thank you for everyone who joined us and asked questions. I apologize on my slip up on paper. Oh, I can't even say it again. I'm just not gonna say that word tonight, but I know what it is. And I again apologize that it's not my word tonight. So thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.